Welcome to the wonderful world of Vectrex. This is probably the only time we're going to get a chance to play a Vectrex game, so I'm going to savour it. It's not a system I've got a lot of history with, but I find the thing absolutely fascinating, and I spent years on eBay trying to find one, and probably I'm fairly glad I never found one, because to be honest, it sounds like a massive pain in the arse to keep. The Vectrex, for a little bit of background, is a vector-based, portable, and I say portable in the weakest of terms, video game console. Came out in 1982. It was manufactured by a company called General Consumer Electronics, who was not somebody I'm aware of, but they were bought by Milton Bradley, or MB, soon after the release of the Vectrex. And Milton Bradley, you will know from board games of the 80s and 90s, and way before then. They've been they're a massive company. They were bought by Hasbro, so they are now just absorbed into Hasbro. So the Vectrex, interesting thing, is, if you've never seen one before, it's a vertical monitor with a controller plugged into the bottom of it. Controller is one analog stick, or one like joystick, and 4 buttons in a line, labelled 1, 2, 3, 4. And it was, according to Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge, it was $200 when it came out, and by the time the video game crash happened, it was $50. And I imagine anybody who bought one of those must be savouring it right now, because they are not $50 anymore, I'll tell you that much. So it's a vector screen, it's monochrome, so it is entirely black and white, which is why you can see in the video here we've got a kind of colour, what would you call that, an overlay? The idea was that the screen was black and white, but they would give you a plastic sheet that you put in front of the screen, and that would have the colour graphics on it, including the name of the game and some extra text, because rendering text was quite expensive. So, yeah, it's quite an interesting thing. You can see it in arcade games of the late 70s, early 80s. You saw it with like the Intellivision controller overlays, and the Atari 5200 I think did it as well. Possibly the Jaguar. Not an unknown thing, but to have a screen that you overlay an entire thing over, not something I'd seen before in a home format. Anyway, we've talked a lot about the console. In terms of the actual game, this is Star Trek the Motion Picture, published or developed again by General Consumer Electronics, so it was built in-house, and has nothing to do with the Sega arcade game, which we just looked at, because that's an entirely separate game altogether, even though they came out the same year. And this is, I think, pretty adventurous for the time. It's this kind of weird, I would hesitate to call it a 3D shooter, because it's not, it's just 2D. It's kind of very similar to some of the stuff that Sega would do in the arcades. But the addition of vector graphics, I think, really does help. So essentially you've got 3 buttons, or 3 buttons you can actually use in the game. You've got a fire button, which is that sort of shot there. You've got the kind of square, I don't even know what you'd call it. So that's your shield. If you use that, you can deflect bullets. And then there's a square one which you can go into the warp zone, whatever you would call it. I'm not a Star Trek person, I apologise. But you also have the 2 bars at the bottom. Firepower, which is how many bullets you've got left, and shield strength, which is how many shields you've got left. So once you run out of firepower, you can't shoot your photons. Once you run out of shield, you can't use your shield to deflect bullets. If you get hit by 1 bullet, you're dead. And you're 3 lives and you're out. So, quite a strict game, but quite an interesting game. I actually, for whatever reason, I really like this. The same with the previous Star Trek game. There's a simplicity to it that I admire. See, I'm about to run out of firepower now, which is going to be mildly embarrassing, I imagine. Yeah, so now all I can do is deflect. But I died anyway, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, it's a really interesting game, and it's something you are never going to see anywhere else, just because of the nature of it requiring vector graphics. And considering this thing is not particularly powerful, I mean, it's got a 1.5 megahertz CPU, it's got 1 kilobyte of memory, and it's basically a screen. Like, it's, there's not a lot of space in the screen for the console. The one thing that does suffer is the sound effects, and I can't help but think that some of the sounds getting stuck, that sounds to me like an emulation bug. I haven't been able to prove that, but I would bet there's something wrong going on here. Maybe not. Maybe it's what it always sounded like. I don't have the real one here to be able to compare to. The depressing thing is, it's really made me want a Vectrex. It's which is not something I can have space for or need. But there you go. So that's the square thing. That takes you through whatever that is. I assume there's a reason for that. I just haven't figured out what it is. But you have to fight the big spaceship thing by shooting the glowy bit, and then you win. And I think by doing that you get an extra life. I had 1A at the bottom. Yeah, I've got 2A now. There's an extra life game, which is quite cool. Apparently it's a Klingon mothership. Good. I don't know Star Trek. Possibly quite obvious from this description of the game. This to me is more impressive than Strategic Operations Simulator. Maybe if I played the arcade version, it would resonate a bit better. But yeah, this is pretty good. To be honest, any excuse to play a Vectrex game is fine by me. So, and you know, it'd be nice to have the real one because I bet the overlay would fit the screen properly. I wouldn't have to spend ages trying to get it to fit. Anyway, that is Star Trek, the motion picture, or as the game calls it, Star Trek the game. It's really good. I really like it. It makes me wish the Vectrex survived longer than it did, but you know, the video game crash killed a lot of things, and the Vectrex was along with those things.